The shovel scraped against frozen concrete as I worked my way down my own driveway at 6 in the morning, watching the snow pile up faster than I could clear it. The blizzard had rolled into Denver, Colorado overnight, dumping what looked like 2 feet already with no signs of stopping. My breath formed thick clouds in the frigid air, and my fingers were going numb despite the heavy gloves. I had just finished my third pass when I heard the shrieking voice cutting through the howling wind. "Excuse me, you there? I need you over here immediately." I looked up to see a woman in an expensive purple parka marching across the street, her boots crunching through the pristine snow. She was probably in her early 50s, with blonde highlights that looked salon fresh and a scowl that seemed permanent. I recognized her vaguely as someone from the neighborhood, but we had never actually spoken. "Can I help you?" I called back, leaning on my shovel. She stopped at the edge of my property line, hands on her hips. "I'm Brenda Morrison, HOA president for Cascade Heights. I've been watching you work, and since you're clearly capable and already out here, I need you to come salt and shovel my walkway. The storm is getting worse, and I have an important Zoom meeting in an hour." I blinked at her through the falling snow. "I'm sorry, what?" "My walkway," she repeated, speaking slowly as if I were dim. "I live 3 houses down, the gray colonial with the stone facade. I expect it done within the next 20 minutes. Lady, I'm doing my own property right now. Maybe call a snow removal service." Her face reddened. "Do you have any idea who I am? I run this HOA. I have authority over every property in this development, including yours. As president, I'm well within my rights to requisition assistance during weather emergencies." I straightened up, genuinely curious now. Requisition assistance? Is that even a thing? Of course it is. It's in the bylaws under Emergency Provisions, Section 12, Paragraph 4. Now, are you going to help, or am I going to have to write you up for non-compliance with HOA directives? The audacity was almost impressive. I had dealt with difficult people before in my line of work, but this was next level. "Look, Brenda, I don't know what you think gives you the right to demand I shovel your driveway, but I'm busy. I suggest you figure it out yourself or wait for the city plows." Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "What's your name? I need it for the violation report." "Ethan Walker," I said, too tired and cold to care about whatever imaginary authority she thought she wielded. She pulled out her phone, tapping aggressively at the screen with gloved fingers. "Ethan Walker. Fine. You'll be receiving a formal complaint within the hour, and I'll be escalating this to the full board. You're looking at daily fines until you comply, Mr. Walker." I take my responsibilities as HOA president very seriously, and residents who refuse to cooperate with emergency protocols face serious consequences. "You do that," I said, turning back to my driveway. "Have a great morning, Brenda. This isn't over." She shouted as she stomped back across the street. "You have no idea what you've just done." I watched her disappear into the white curtain of falling snow, shaking my head. After 15 years of property management and real estate investment in the Denver metro area, I thought I had seen every variety of entitled neighbor. Clearly, I was wrong. I finished my driveway, then started on the walkway, my mind already moving on to other concerns. The blizzard was supposed to last another 12 hours, and I had 3 other properties in the area that would need attention. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a text from my property manager, Julie Martinez. She had been handling the day-to-day operations for my rental portfolio for the past 5 years, and she was frighteningly efficient. "Just got a weird email from someone claiming to be HOA president in Cascade Heights. Says one of our tenants is violating emergency protocols." "Do you know anything about this?" I called her back immediately. Julie, hey, yeah, I just had a run-in with her. Some lady named Brenda Morrison demanded I shovel her walkway. Julie's laugh crackled through the phone. You're kidding. What did you tell her? I told her to figure it out herself. She threatened me with fines and violations. Want me to handle it? Nah, I've got it. But actually, while I have you on the phone, remind me which properties we own in Cascade Heights again. I know we picked up a few during that foreclosure sale last year, but I can't remember the exact addresses. I heard the clicking of keyboard keys. Let me pull up the file. Okay, you personally own 4 properties in that subdivision. Your primary residence at 847 Pinecrest Drive, where you're living now. Then there's the rental at 823 Pinecrest Drive, currently leased to the Kowalski family. Another rental at 891 Pinecrest Drive, leased to a college professor, Dr. Sarah Chen. And then there's 889 Pinecrest Drive, the gray colonial with the stone facade. That one's been rented out for the past 8 months to a... Oh wow. What? Ethan, your renter at 889 Pinecrest is Brenda Morrison. She signed a 1-year lease in April of last year. I stood absolutely still as the implications sank in. The woman who had just threatened to fine me, who had demanded I shovel her walkway while pulling rank as HOA president, was my tenant. She was living in a house I owned, paying me rent every month, and had no idea who I was. You're absolutely sure? I asked. Positive. I have the lease right here. Brenda Lynn Morrison, age 53, works in pharmaceutical sales. She's been paying on time every month through auto deposit. No complaints, no maintenance requests. Model tenant, actually. This is unbelievable. What are you going to do? Good question. The smart business move would be to have Julie send a polite email clarifying the relationship and moving on. But the more I thought about Brenda's entitled attitude, her threats, and her abuse of what little authority she had, the less I felt like being smart. Sometimes people needed to learn lessons the hard way. For now, nothing, I said, but keep that lease handy. I have a feeling I'm going to need it soon. Your funeral. Hey, be careful out there. The Weather Service just upgraded the blizzard warning. They're saying this could be one of the worst storms Denver's seen in a decade. We hung up, and I went back inside to warm up. My house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch that I had bought as my primary residence 2 years ago, when I decided to consolidate some of my investments in the Cascade Heights development. The neighborhood was nice, with good schools and easy access to downtown Denver. Property values had been climbing steadily, which made it a smart investment. I had never gotten involved with the HOA, preferring to pay my dues and otherwise ignore the petty politics that came with these organizations. I made coffee and watched the snow continue to fall, wondering how long it would take for Brenda to make good on her threats. The answer came faster than expected. At 8:30, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Brenda standing there with 2 other people, both looking miserable in the cold. One was a thin man in his 60s wearing a ski jacket that had seen better days. The other was a younger woman, maybe 30, holding a clipboard and looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. Mr. Walker, Brenda announced formally. I'm here in my official capacity as HOA president, accompanied by board members Gerald Henderson and Melissa Freeman. We need to discuss your violation this morning. In the middle of a blizzard, I asked. Really? HOA business doesn't stop for weather, Brenda said crisply. May we come in? I considered making them conduct their little kangaroo court on my front porch, but decided that was too petty even for me. Fine. Wipe your feet. They filed into my living room, Brenda taking the armchair like she owned it while the other 2 perched awkwardly on my couch. Gerald looked apologetic, Melissa seemed to be studying her clipboard with intense focus. "Let's get straight to it," Brenda said, pulling out her phone. "This morning at approximately 6:15, I approached you and requested assistance with snow removal, as is my right under the emergency protocols outlined in the Cascade Heights HOA bylaws. You refused this reasonable request and were verbally hostile." "I wasn't hostile. I was busy shoveling my own driveway." "Your tone was dismissive and rude," she continued. "Furthermore, by refusing to assist during a declared weather emergency, you violated Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws, which clearly states that all residents must provide reasonable assistance to fellow residents during declared emergencies when directly requested by a board member." I looked at Gerald and Melissa. "Is that actually a real thing?" Gerald shifted uncomfortably. "Well, technically yes, but it's usually interpreted to mean things like allowing access to your property for emergency vehicles or sharing generators during power outages. I don't think it's ever been used to compel someone to shovel someone else's driveway." Brenda shot him a sharp look. "The bylaw doesn't specify what constitutes reasonable assistance. That's left to board discretion, which means my interpretation as president carries weight. Mr. Walker refused a direct request during an emergency. That's a clear violation." "Brenda," Melissa said quietly, "maybe we should table this until after the storm. It seems like this could have been a misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding," Brenda insisted. "He was deliberately obstructive. Now, Mr. Walker, you have two options. You can agree to come salt and shovel my walkway right now, and we'll consider this matter resolved with a warning. Or you can continue to refuse, and we'll be forced to impose fines of $100 per day until you comply." The absurdity of the situation was almost funny. Here was my tenant, sitting in my living room, threatening to fine me for not doing her personal snow removal. I wondered what she would do if I told her the truth right now. But something stopped me. I wanted to see how far she would take this. "I'm not shoveling your driveway, Brenda," I said calmly. "Your emergency doesn't constitute an obligation on my part." Her face flushed. "Then you leave us no choice. As of right now, you're being fined $100 per day for non-compliance with HOA emergency directives. This will continue until you either comply or the board meets and decides on further action." "When's the next board meeting?" I asked. 2 weeks from tomorrow," Melissa said, checking her clipboard. "It's our regular monthly meeting." "Perfect. I'll see you then." I stood up, making it clear the conversation was over. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Brenda stood as well, her expression triumphant. "You're making a serious mistake, Mr. Walker. The HOA has considerable power to make life difficult for non-compliant residents. I suggest you reconsider before this escalates further." "I'll take my chances." After they left, I sat back down and called Julie again. "I need you to pull together every document we have on Brenda Morrison. Lease, application, payment history, all of it. And I want you to review the Cascade Heights HOA bylaws. I need to know exactly what authority the board actually has." "She's really going after you, huh?" "Oh yeah. And I'm going to let her dig herself in deep before I pull the rug out." "That sounds like a dangerous game, Ethan." "Probably. But sometimes people like Brenda need to learn that their little kingdoms aren't as powerful as they think." The blizzard continued through the afternoon and into the evening. I spent the time doing what I should have been doing all along, reviewing my properties, checking on tenants, and making sure everyone in my rental portfolio was safe and had what they needed. The Kowalskis, who lived 2 doors down from me, needed help with a frozen pipe. Dr. Chen, the college professor, needed someone to check on her elderly cat while she was stranded at the university. Normal landlord stuff. Around 6 that evening, my doorbell rang again. This time it was Gerald Henderson, alone and looking sheepish. "Mr. Walker, I'm sorry to bother you. Can we talk for a minute?" I let him in. He declined coffee, standing nervously in my entryway. "I wanted to apologize for this morning," he said. "Brenda has been increasingly difficult lately. She takes the HOA president role very seriously, maybe too seriously." "You think?" He winced. "I know how it looked. The truth is, most of the board is pretty uncomfortable with how she's been running things. She calls emergency meetings at odd hours, sends out these long emails about violations that aren't really violations, and generally makes everyone miserable. But she was elected by the community, and technically, she has the authority to do most of what she's doing. What about this fine she's trying to impose? That's where it gets murky. The bylaws do give the board authority to levy fines for violations, but there's supposed to be a formal hearing process first. She can't just unilaterally decide you're in violation and start charging you. At least, that's my understanding. I'm not a lawyer." "So why didn't you say something this morning?" Gerald sighed. "Because she'll make my life hell if I contradict her publicly. She's already threatened to call for my removal from the board twice this year over disagreements. I know that makes me a coward, but I'm 67 years old and I just want to live quietly in my house without constant drama. I'm sorry." I felt a bit of sympathy for him. Brenda was clearly a bully, and bullies surrounded themselves with people too tired or intimidated to fight back. "It's okay, Gerald. I appreciate you coming by. For what it's worth, at the next board meeting, I'll vote against any formal sanctions. Melissa will too. We're not bad people, Mr. Walker. We're just stuck with a bad president." After he left, I spent some time researching Colorado HOA law. It turned out Gerald was right. While HOAs in Colorado had considerable power, including the ability to levy fines and even place liens on properties for unpaid dues, there were strict procedural requirements. Brenda couldn't just decide I was in violation and start fining me. There had to be formal notice, an opportunity for me to respond, and a hearing before the full board. Her threat this morning had been completely outside the proper process. The next morning, the snow had finally stopped. Denver was buried under nearly 3 feet of fresh powder, and the whole city had essentially shut down. Schools were closed, businesses were closed, and even the major highways were still being cleared. I spent the morning digging out my driveway again and helping the Kowalskis with their pipe situation. Around noon, I bundled up and took a walk through the neighborhood, curious to see how bad things were. As I walked past Brenda's house, my rental property, I noticed something interesting. Her driveway was completely uncleared. Snow was piled high against her garage door and her walkway was impassable. But in her front window, I could see her sitting at a desk, presumably on one of her important Zoom calls. She had never even tried to clear it herself. Over the next week, things got weird. I started receiving daily emails from Brenda, each one more formal and threatening than the last. They all said essentially the same thing. I was in violation, I owed increasing fines, and if I didn't comply immediately, the HOA would take legal action. The fines were now up to $700 according to her calculations. I ignored all of them and forwarded each one to Julie, who was building a file. She had also been in contact with a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, just in case things got truly out of hand. On day 9 after the incident, I received a certified letter. It was from the Cascade Heights HOA, formally notifying me that I was in violation of community bylaws and that a lien would be placed on my property if I didn't pay the outstanding fines, which were now listed as $900, within 10 days. That was when I decided it was time to act. I called Julie and told her to prepare the documents I would need. Then I called Melissa Freeman, the younger board member who had been with Brenda that first morning. "Mr. Walker," she answered cautiously, "I'm guessing this is about the fine situation." "It is." "Melissa, I need you to be honest with me. Did the full board vote on sending me that certified letter?" There was a long pause. "No, Brenda drafted it herself and had it sent. She said it was within her authority as president to handle violations administratively." "That's not legal, is it?" "I don't think so. I tried to tell her she needed to bring it to a full board vote, but she shut me down. She said I was too new to understand how HOA governance works." "Mr. Walker, I'm really uncomfortable with all of this. I only joined the board because I thought it would be a good way to meet neighbors. I didn't sign up for whatever this has become. How would you feel about supporting a motion to recall her as president? Is that possible? According to the bylaws I've been reading, yes. If a majority of board members vote to remove an officer, and that vote is then ratified by a majority of homeowners at a special meeting, the president can be removed. You, Gerald, and whoever else is on the board could make that happen." "There are 5 of us total," Melissa said. "Me, Gerald, Brenda, and 2 others. Patricia Lee and Robert Donovan. Patricia might support it. Robert is basically Brenda's puppet. He'll vote however she tells him to. So 3 votes out of 5. That's enough. But then we'd need a homeowner vote. And honestly, Mr. Walker, most people in this neighborhood don't pay attention to HOA stuff. Getting a majority to show up for a special meeting would be nearly impossible." She had a point. HOA politics were usually ignored by everyone except the busybodies who thrived on them. "Let me worry about that part. For now, I need you to tell me, is the board meeting still scheduled for tomorrow night?" "Yes, 7 p.m. at the community center. Are you planning to attend?" "Absolutely." "And Melissa, I need you to trust me on something. Don't tell Brenda I called and don't mention anything about a recall. Just show up tomorrow and follow my lead. This is making me nervous. It should make Brenda more nervous. See you tomorrow." That evening, I had Julie overnight me a packet of documents. Inside was every piece of paper related to Brenda Morrison's tenancy. Her rental application, her lease agreement, 12 months of payment records, and the deed showing my ownership of 889 Pinecrest Drive. I also had Julie include a letter from our lawyer, outlining the procedural violations Brenda had committed in her handling of my case. The next day, I dressed in a suit. If I was going to pull this off, I needed to look the part. I arrived at the community center at 6:45, early enough to get a good seat, but not so early that I'd have to make small talk. The room was set up with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of chairs for attendees. About 15 people were scattered around, most of them looking bored or annoyed at having to be there. Brenda swept in at 6:55, wearing a power suit and carrying a leather portfolio. She spotted me immediately, and her expression turned cold. "Mr. Walker," she said loudly, addressing the room as much as me, "I'm surprised to see you here. Have you come to settle your outstanding fines?" "I've come to observe the board meeting," I said neutrally. "That's allowed, isn't it? Of course. Though I should warn you, your violation will be on the agenda tonight. The board will be voting on whether to proceed with placing a lien on your property." "Looking forward to it." The other board members filed in. Gerald gave me a subtle nod. Melissa looked nervous. Patricia Lee, a stern woman in her 70s, looked confused about what was happening. Robert Donovan, a paunchy guy in his 40s, sat next to Brenda and whispered something to her. Brenda called the meeting to order and immediately launched into the agenda. There was boring stuff first. Approval of last meeting's minutes, discussion of landscaping contracts, debate over whether to allow holiday decorations past January 15th. I sat through it all patiently, my folder of documents on my lap. Finally, after 45 minutes, Brenda got to the part she had clearly been waiting for. "Next item," she announced. "Resolution of violation by resident Ethan Walker of 847 Pinecrest Drive. As detailed in my previous communications to the board, Mr. Walker refused to provide emergency assistance during the recent blizzard, in direct violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our bylaws. He has also refused to pay the accumulated fines, which now total $1,300. I'm asking the board to authorize placement of a lien on his property to secure payment." "That's a pretty serious step," Patricia said. "Did he get a proper hearing?" "I sent him multiple notices of violation," Brenda said. "He ignored all of them. At some point we have to enforce our rules, or the HOA becomes meaningless." "I'd like to speak," I said, standing up. "Residents may address the board during the public comment period at the end of the meeting," Brenda said dismissively. "Please sit down." "Actually," Gerald interjected, "if someone is directly affected by an agenda item, they have the right to speak before the board votes. It's in the procedural rules." Brenda's jaw tightened, but she couldn't argue with that. "Fine, make it quick, Mr. Walker." I walked to the front of the room and placed my folder on the table. "Thank you. I want to address several points. First, the underlying violation. Brenda claims I violated Section 12, Paragraph 4 by refusing to help her during an emergency. I'd like to point out that this bylaw has never been interpreted to mean that residents must provide personal services to board members. Gerald confirmed as much during our initial meeting. If every resident had to shovel every board member's driveway during a snowstorm, we'd have chaos. The bylaw is about allowing access for emergency services, not compelling free labor." Several people in the audience nodded. Brenda's face was reddening. "Second," I continued, "the process Brenda has followed is completely improper. Under Colorado HOA law, specifically the Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act, a homeowner accused of a violation has the right to formal notice, a hearing before the full board, and an opportunity to present a defense before any fines can be levied. None of that happened here. Brenda unilaterally decided I was in violation and started charging me daily fines without any board vote or proper procedure." "That's not true," Brenda snapped. "I have the authority to handle administrative matters." "Not according to this," I said, pulling out the lawyer's letter. "This is an opinion from Stevens and Associates, a law firm specializing in HOA governance. They've reviewed the Colorado statutes and the Cascade Heights bylaws, and they've concluded that every action Brenda has taken in this matter has been procedurally improper and potentially exposes the HOA to liability." I handed copies of the letter to each board member. Gerald and Melissa read theirs immediately. Patricia looked intrigued. Robert glanced at his and pushed it aside, looking to Brenda for guidance. "This is ridiculous," Brenda said. "You're trying to intimidate the board with legal threats because you don't want to face consequences for your actions." "Actually, I'm trying to prevent the HOA from getting sued because its president doesn't understand the rules she's supposed to be following. But there's a third issue we need to address, and this one is the most important." I pulled out the lease agreement and the property deed, holding them up for everyone to see. "This is the lease for 889 Pinecrest Drive, the gray colonial with the stone facade. The property Brenda Morrison has been living in for the past 8 months. And this is the deed to that property, showing ownership by Walker Property Holdings, LLC. That's my company. Brenda has been my tenant since April of last year. The room went completely silent. Every eye turned to Brenda, whose face had gone from red to white in about 3 seconds. "What?" she managed to say. "You're my tenant, Brenda. You pay me rent every month, have been for 8 months. When you demanded I shovel your walkway and threatened to fine me, you were threatening your own landlord." "That's impossible," she said, but her voice was shaky. "I rent from a property management company, Martinez Property Services. Martinez Property Services manages my properties. They handle the day-to-day operations, including collecting rent and coordinating maintenance. But I own the house. Me, Ethan Walker." Gerald was grinning openly now. Melissa looked like she was trying not to laugh. Patricia was studying the documents I had distributed with great interest. "This is a conflict of interest," Robert said, clearly scrambling. "He can't be both a homeowner in the community and a landlord. That violates the bylaws." "Actually, it doesn't," Patricia said, looking up from her reading. "The bylaws say nothing about restricting landlords from ownership within the community. We have several rental properties in Cascade Heights. This is perfectly legitimate." Brenda had recovered somewhat, though she still looked shaken. "This doesn't change anything. You still violated the emergency assistance bylaw, regardless of our landlord-tenant relationship." "Did I?" "Because I'm looking at your lease right now, Brenda. Section 8, Paragraph 2, Tenant Responsibilities. It clearly states that the tenant is responsible for basic maintenance of the property, including snow and ice removal from all walkways and driveways. You're required to keep them clear and safe. Not me. You. When you demanded I come clear your walkway, you were asking me to do something that you're contractually obligated to do yourself." The audience was fully engaged now, people whispering to each other and watching the drama unfold. "Furthermore," I continued, "Section 11 of your lease addresses conduct requirements. It specifies that tenants must comply with all community rules and regulations, and may not use their position in any community organization to harass or retaliate against the landlord. By threatening me with fines and liens in my capacity as both a homeowner and your landlord, you've violated your lease agreement." "You're twisting everything," Brenda said desperately. "This is retaliation because I tried to enforce HOA rules." "The HOA rules you misinterpreted and the procedures you violated." "I don't think so. Look, Brenda, I'm willing to make this simple. Drop all the fines, acknowledge that your interpretation of the emergency bylaw was wrong, and we'll call this a learning experience. Or we can escalate, and I can explore whether your conduct constitutes grounds for lease termination. You can't evict me for this. Colorado lease law says I can terminate a lease if the tenant engages in harassment of the landlord or other residents, uses the property in a way that violates community standards, or commits material breaches of the lease terms. You've arguably done all three. I'd rather not go down that road, but I will if you force the issue." Brenda looked around the table, clearly hoping for support from the other board members. None came. Robert was studying his hands. Patricia was still reading through the documents. Gerald and Melissa were watching with expressions that suggested they were enjoying this way too much. "I think," Patricia said slowly, "that we need to table this matter entirely. Mr. Walker is correct that proper procedures weren't followed. The violation claims appear to be based on a misinterpretation of the bylaws, and the personal conflict between Mr. Walker and Brenda makes this situation too complicated for us to handle tonight. I move that we dismiss all fines and violations against Mr. Walker, and that we establish a review committee to examine our enforcement procedures to make sure this doesn't happen again." "Second," Gerald said immediately. "All in favor?" Patricia asked. 3 hands went up: Patricia, Gerald, and Melissa. Robert looked at Brenda, then reluctantly raised his hand as well. Brenda sat frozen, her hand firmly on the table. "Motion carries," Patricia said. "Mr. Walker, on behalf of the board, I apologize for this mess. You're free of any violations or fines." "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate the board doing the right thing." I gathered my documents and returned to my seat. The meeting continued for a few more minutes, but the energy had gone out of it. People were already starting to leave, and Brenda looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. When Patricia finally adjourned, I made my way to the exit. Gerald caught up with me in the parking lot. "That was magnificent. I've been wanting someone to take her down a peg for 2 years." "I'm not trying to destroy her," I said. "I just wanted her to understand that she can't bully people." "Well, you succeeded. I doubt she'll last much longer as president. Patricia was already skeptical of her, and after tonight I think she'll push for new leadership. Good luck with that. And Gerald, thanks for being honest with me from the start. It helped." I drove home feeling satisfied. The situation had been resolved without anyone getting hurt. Brenda had learned a valuable lesson about abusing authority, and the HOA board seemed ready to rein in its president's excesses. All in all, a good outcome. But apparently, Brenda wasn't done yet. 3 days after the board meeting, I came home to find a notice taped to my door. It was from the City Code Enforcement Office, claiming that my property was in violation of Denver Municipal Code for excessive snow accumulation. The complaint had been filed anonymously, but I had no doubt who was behind it. I called the number on the notice and reached a board-sounding inspector named Tom Richardson. "Yeah, we got a complaint about your address," he said. "Someone said you weren't maintaining your property after the blizzard. I'm supposed to come out and take a look." "My property is fine," I said. "The driveway and walkways are clear. This is a retaliatory complaint from someone I had a dispute with." "Probably, but I still have to check it out." "It's my job. Can I swing by tomorrow morning?" "Sure, I'll be here." Tom showed up at 9 the next morning, clipboard in hand. He was a middle-aged guy with a tired expression that suggested he dealt with petty neighbor disputes regularly. He walked around my property, took some photos, and made notes. "You're fine," he said. "Everything's clear and well-maintained. I'll close out the complaint." "Thanks. Out of curiosity, do you keep records of who files these complaints?" "They're supposed to be anonymous, but yeah, we keep internal records in case there's a pattern of abuse." "Why?" "Because I think the person who filed this is going to keep doing it. She's angry that I want to dispute with her, and she's the vindictive type." Tom sighed. "Great. Well, if she keeps filing false complaints, we can potentially charge her with misuse of city services. But that's down the road. For now, you're good." I thanked him and went inside. As predicted, more complaints followed. Over the next week, the city received anonymous reports that my fence was improperly installed. It wasn't. That I was running a business from my home in violation of zoning laws, I wasn't. And that I had unpermitted construction happening, I didn't. Each time, inspectors came out, found nothing wrong, and closed the complaint. On the 5th complaint, Tom Richardson called me directly. "Mr. Walker, I don't usually do this, but I wanted to give you a heads up. The person filing these complaints isn't as anonymous as they think. Their IP address and phone number are in our system, and it's the same person every time. Brenda Morrison, 889 Pinecrest Drive. That address mean anything to you? She's my tenant. And yes, we've had a conflict. Figured. Look, I'm documenting all of this. If she files any more false complaints, my supervisor is going to issue her a formal warning. If it continues after that, she could face misdemeanor charges for harassment and misuse of government services. You might want to let her know that." "I will." Thanks, Tom. I called Julie and had her draft a formal letter to Brenda, outlining the situation with the code enforcement complaints and warning her that continued harassment would result in lease termination proceedings. We sent it certified mail and included copies of all the closed complaint reports, making it clear we knew exactly what she was doing. For a few days, things were quiet. I started to think maybe Brenda had finally gotten the message. Then, I received a call from Dr. Chen, my tenant in the professor's house. "Mr. Walker, I'm sorry to bother you, but something strange happened today. A woman came to my door claiming to be from the HOA. She said she was conducting an inspection of rental properties to ensure they met community standards. She wanted to come inside and look around. What did you tell her?" I told her no, obviously. I don't let strangers into my house. She got very pushy and said she had the authority to enter any property in the subdivision. I closed the door and called you. Let me guess. Blonde hair, purple coat, looked like she wanted to speak to a manager. That's her exactly. You know her. Unfortunately, she's HOA president and we've had issues. She has no right to enter your property, Dr. Chen. If she comes back, tell her you'll call the police and let me know immediately. Will do. This is getting concerning, Mr. Walker. It was. Brenda was escalating, moving from petty harassment to potentially illegal behavior. HOA presidents didn't have the right to conduct warrantless inspections of private property, especially rental properties where they had no relationship with the tenant. If she had actually tried to force her way in, that could be criminal trespassing. I needed to shut this down before it got worse. I called the lawyer Julie had been working with, a sharp woman named Rebecca Stone. I explained everything that had happened since the board meeting, the false code enforcement complaints, the attempted entry to Dr. Chen's property, and Brenda's ongoing harassment. "You've got a solid case for a restraining order," Rebecca said. "She's engaging in a pattern of harassment that's both personal and business related. Given her position in the HOA, there's also an argument for abuse of authority. I can file the paperwork today if you want. Do it." I tried to resolve this amicably, but she's not getting the message. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, Rebecca filed an emergency temporary restraining order that prohibited Brenda from contacting me or any of my tenants, from coming onto any property I owned, and from using her position in the HOA to take any action related to me or my properties. The temporary order was served on Brenda 2 days later. According to the process server, she answered the door, read the paperwork, and slammed the door without saying a word. That evening, I got a call from Patricia Lee, the board member who had helped shut down Brenda's initial violation attempt. "Mr. Walker, I wanted to inform you that the board held an emergency meeting this afternoon. We voted to remove Brenda Morrison as president, effective immediately. The vote was unanimous among the 4 of us present. Brenda did not attend. That must have been an interesting conversation. It was overdue. After the situation at the last meeting, several residents came forward with complaints about Brenda's behavior. She's been abusing her authority for months, maybe longer. We should have acted sooner. Gerald Henderson is now interim president and will be holding elections for a permanent president next month. I'm also calling to assure you that the HOA will cooperate fully with any legal proceedings involving Brenda. Her actions don't represent the community. I appreciate that, Patricia. For what it's worth, I have no issue with the HOA itself or the other board members. This has only been about Brenda. We understand, and thank you for handling this professionally. A lot of people would have come in swinging after what she put you through." The restraining order hearing arrived on a cold Tuesday morning. I met Rebecca at the courthouse downtown, and we waited in a small courtroom for our case to be called. Brenda showed up alone, without a lawyer, looking defiant but also worn down. The past few weeks had clearly taken a toll. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Andrea Santos, reviewed the filings quickly. "Miss Morrison, you've been served with a temporary restraining order. Do you understand the allegations against you?" "Yes, Your Honor," Brenda said stiffly, "but they're exaggerated. This is retaliation because I tried to enforce HOA rules in my community. I've read Mr. Walker's filing and the supporting documentation. It alleges that you abused your position as HOA president to harass him after a personal dispute, filed multiple false complaints with city code enforcement, and attempted to gain unauthorized entry to a property owned by Mr. Walker but occupied by a different tenant." "Are these allegations accurate?" Brenda hesitated. "Some of those things happened, but not the way he's describing them." "Which things happened?" "I may have filed some code complaints, but I genuinely believe there were violations. And I did visit his rental property, but only to conduct legitimate HOA business." Judge Santos looked over her glasses at Brenda. "Miss Morrison, according to these city records, you filed 5 separate complaints against Mr. Walker's property over an 8-day period. All 5 were investigated and found to be without merit. The city inspector has stated in a sworn affidavit that he believes the complaints were filed in bad faith. As for the rental property visit, the tenant has provided a statement saying you demanded entry without permission or legal authority and became aggressive when refused. HOA presidents do not have the right to conduct warrantless searches of private property. You're an attorney, I assume you know this." "I'm not an attorney, Your Honor. I work in pharmaceutical sales." "Then perhaps you should have consulted one before engaging in this behavior." "Mr. Walker, do you wish to make a statement?" I stood. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm not interested in punishing Miss Morrison. I just want the harassment to stop. She's my tenant, and I need to maintain a professional landlord-tenant relationship. She's also part of my community HOA, and I'd like to live in my neighborhood without constant conflict. If she agrees to stop the harassing behavior and respects the boundaries of her various roles, I'm fine with that." "That's very gracious of you. Miss Morrison, do you understand that your behavior has been inappropriate?" Brenda was silent for a long moment. Then very quietly she said, "Yes." "Good. I'm going to issue a permanent restraining order with the following terms. You are prohibited from having any contact with Mr. Walker except as necessary for legitimate landlord-tenant communications, which must be in writing and limited to property maintenance issues. You are prohibited from filing any complaints against his properties unless you have documented evidence of actual violations. You are prohibited from using your position in the HOA, if you still have one, to take any action targeting Mr. Walker or his properties. You are prohibited from visiting any property owned by Mr. Walker except the one you currently rent, and then only to come and go from your residence. Any violation of these terms will result in contempt charges. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Mr. Walker, if she violates this order, contact the police immediately. This court takes restraining orders seriously. We're adjourned." Outside the courthouse, Rebecca walked me to my car. That went about as well as it could have. Judge Santos didn't mess around. "Do you think Brenda will follow it?" "I think she's scared enough now that she will. But keep documentation of everything, just in case. And Mr. Walker, you should think about whether you want to renew her lease when it comes up in April. You have the right to non-renew for any reason with proper notice. I've been thinking about that. Part of me wants her out just to avoid future problems, but another part feels like forcing her to move would be petty revenge. That's between you and your conscience. Legally, you're well within your rights not to renew. Colorado is a landlord-friendly state on that front. I drove home thinking about it. Brenda's lease was up in 6 weeks. I needed to make a decision soon about whether to offer renewal. When I got back to my house, there was an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. Mr. Walker, I know I can't contact you directly per the judge's order, so I'm leaving this note as a one-time communication. I want to apologize for my behavior over the past month. I was wrong about the HOA bylaws, wrong in how I handled the situation, and wrong to continue harassing you after you tried to de-escalate things. I let my pride and anger get the better of me. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I recognize I was at fault. As for my lease, I understand if you choose not to renew it. I've already started looking at other places, and I'll be out by the end of March if that's what you prefer. I'm also resigning from the HOA board entirely. I clearly wasn't suited for leadership, and I don't want to cause more problems for the community. Again, I'm sorry. Brenda Morrison. I stood on my porch reading the note twice. It seemed genuine, and the fact that she was already planning to move suggested she understood how badly she had damaged our relationship. I felt a mixture of relief and something like pity. Brenda had created her own disaster through arrogance and poor judgment, but she was at least taking responsibility now. I called Julie. Brenda's planning to move out at the end of March. She left me a note apologizing for everything. Wow, do you believe her? I think so. She sounded sincere. I'm going to send her a formal notice of non-renewal anyway, just to make everything official. But I'll waive the 60-day notice requirement and let her break the lease early without penalty. Clean break for everyone. That's generous given what she put you through. Maybe. But holding grudges is exhausting. She learned her lesson, she's facing consequences, and now we can all move on. Over the next few weeks, things slowly returned to normal. The neighborhood recovered from the blizzard. The HOA held elections and Gerald Henderson became the official president, with Melissa Freeman as vice president. They sent out a newsletter announcing a review of all HOA procedures to ensure better accountability and respect for homeowner rights. Several residents thanked me personally for standing up to Brenda. Apparently, she had been making people miserable for years. Brenda kept to herself. I occasionally saw her coming and going from the rental house, always careful to avoid any interaction. She was polite on the rare occasions our paths crossed, offering brief nods but no conversation. True to her word, she resigned from the HOA board and didn't attend any community meetings. In late March, I received notice from Julie that Brenda had turned in her keys and moved out. The house was in perfect condition, cleaned professionally, with all utilities settled. Her security deposit was returned in full. The whole situation ended as cleanly as it possibly could have. A few days after Brenda moved out, Gerald Henderson invited me to coffee. We met at a place near downtown, and he was grinning when I arrived. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said. "The neighborhood is so much more peaceful without Brenda's constant drama. The new board is actually functional." We had a meeting last week where people discussed issues calmly and reached compromises. It was bizarre and wonderful. Glad it worked out. How's Melissa doing? She's fantastic. Young people bring such good energy to these things. She's already proposed 3 sensible bylaw amendments that everyone supports, and Patricia is keeping us all honest. We're actually talking about reducing HOA dues next year because we're not spending money on Brenda's pet projects anymore. What kind of pet projects? Gerald rolled his eyes. Oh, She wanted to hire a private security company to patrol the neighborhood. She wanted to install surveillance cameras at all the entrances. She wanted to pass rules about what kind of cars people could park in their driveways. It was constant. We spent half our time just talking her down from authoritarian fantasies. Sounds exhausting. It was, but it's better now. Actually, I had an ulterior motive for asking you to coffee. The board wants to know if you'd be interested in joining. We have an empty seat with Brenda gone, and you've proven you understand the law and can stand up to unreasonable people. Plus, you own multiple properties in the neighborhood, so you have a real stake in how things are run. I considered it. Part of me wanted nothing to do with HOA politics after everything that had happened. But another part recognized that HOAs worked best when reasonable people participated. If I stayed on the sidelines, the next Brenda would eventually take over. Let me think about it, I said. I'm not sure I have the time with my other properties, but I appreciate the offer. No pressure, but we'd love to have you. I left the coffee shop thinking about community, responsibility, and how little things like HOA governance actually mattered in creating the kind of place people wanted to live. Brenda had seen the HOA as a source of personal power, a way to control others and feed her ego. But at its core, an HOA was supposed to be neighbors working together to maintain shared spaces and protect property values. When it worked right, nobody even noticed it was there. Over the following months, I ended up accepting Gerald's offer and joining the board. It was less dramatic than I expected. We met once a month, discussed boring maintenance issues, approved reasonable requests, and generally tried to stay out of people's way. Melissa's energy and Patricia's experience made for good balance, and the whole thing was actually kind of pleasant. I never saw Brenda again. I heard through neighborhood gossip that she had moved to a different part of Denver and was renting an apartment downtown. Someone said she had joined the board of her new building and was already clashing with the other residents, but I never confirmed if that was true. People love to gossip, especially about fallen tyrants. The gray Colonial at 889 Pinecrest Drive rented quickly to a family with 2 kids and a golden retriever. They were quiet, paid on time, and never demanded I shovel their driveway. The neighborhood continued to thrive. Property values climbed. The HOA remained functional and boring, which was exactly what it should be. Sometimes I thought about that morning during the blizzard, Brenda marching across the street in her purple coat, absolutely certain of her authority and power. I wondered what would have happened if I had just shoveled her walkway. Would it have avoided all the drama? Or would she have simply found another target, another excuse to exercise her perceived control over others? In the end, I decided it didn't matter. Some people needed to learn that authority came with limits, that power without accountability led to disaster, and that treating others with basic respect was more important than winning petty battles. Brenda learned those lessons the hard way, through public embarrassment and legal consequences. Maybe she took them to heart. Maybe she didn't. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. The important thing was that the community moved forward. People lived their lives without fear of arbitrary rules or vindictive enforcement. The HOA became what it should be, a quiet organization in the background, maintaining standards without interfering in daily life. And I got to live in my house, manage my properties, and never worry about angry neighbors demanding I clear their driveways. On the anniversary of the blizzard, Denver got hit with another big storm. Not quite as bad as the previous year, but still significant. I was out at dawn with my shovel, clearing my driveway and walkway before heading to work. The neighborhood was quiet, everyone focused on their own properties. As I finished up, I noticed the family renting the old Brenda house was struggling with their driveway. The dad was out there with an undersized shovel, clearly not making much progress. Their two kids were trying to help, throwing snow everywhere. I walked over. "Hey, need a hand?" "I've got a snowblower in my garage I can bring over." The guy looked relieved. "That would be amazing. We moved from Arizona last year. We're still figuring out this snow thing." "No problem. Welcome to Colorado. Let me grab my equipment." We spent the next half hour clearing their driveway and walkway together, the kids running around and having snowball fights while we worked. When we finished, the dad invited me in for coffee, and we chatted about the neighborhood, schools, and the general challenges of adjusting to mountain weather. Walking back to my house later, I reflected on how different this interaction was from the one a year earlier. No demands, no threats, no power games. Just neighbors helping each other because that's what people should do. That was the kind of community worth maintaining, the kind worth protecting from petty tyrants who valued authority over human decency. The snow kept falling, blanketing everything in fresh white powder. I went inside, made breakfast, and started my day. Outside my window, the neighborhood went about its business. People clearing driveways, kids building snowmen, life continuing in all its ordinary, undramatic beauty. It was perfect. And best of all, there wasn't a single purple coat in sight.